A single slap made the whole street go silent. A single kick made them stop turning away. But this isn't a story about violence. It's a reckoning with what happens when good people say nothing. An 84-year-old man was knocked to the ground just because his coat brushed against a motorcycle. Nobody helped. Not one hand reached out. But 42 seconds later, the biker was on the ground. Not because of revenge, not because of justice, but because someone had finally had enough. This is the story of a single kick, but not from the man you're thinking of. And the reason why might just make you rethink how you've been walking past people like Walter. And it all began with a loaf of bread. His name was Walter Briggs, 84 years old. 5'9" if he stood straight, which he hadn't done in years. One leg a little shorter after shrapnel near Basra, the other worn down by time not war. Every Thursday morning at 9:15 like clockwork, Walter walked past the same line of shops on Main Street. He wore the same olive-green army jacket sleeves patched at the elbows, name tag faded almost to invisibility, W.B. Briggs. But nobody ever asked what it stood for. He wasn't a fixture because people cared. He was a fixture because people stopped noticing. To most, he was just that old man, with a cane, slow but steady, always heading somewhere, but never seeming in a rush. What they didn't know was that he walked the exact same route each week for a reason. First stop, the corner deli. He bought a small loaf of rye, some cough drops, and a postcard, always a postcard. Next, the mailbox. He mailed a note to his grandson, Cadet Briggs, currently stationed 3 states over. Walter never missed a week. Not when it rained, not when his hip ached, not even when he had the flu. He never used email. He said it wasn't the same. Said a man ought to hold something in his hand to feel what love really weighs. Some Thursday mornings he'd pause in front of the barber shop, the one with the old striped pole that never turned anymore. Walter would glance through the dusty window at the cracked leather chairs inside, then move on without a word. That chair had once held his best friend Vince before Vince shipped out and never came back. Walter had never gone inside again. He had 3 bronze stars, 1 purple heart, and a rebuilt left shoulder, courtesy of a landmine. None of that was visible now, except for a slight dip in how he carried his right side. He didn't speak of the past, didn't wear hats or pins. He didn't need the world to know he'd been a soldier. He just needed to keep walking. That morning, as always, he moved carefully along the sidewalk. Cold air bit at his cheeks. One hand gripped the cane. The other cradled his paper bag like it was something sacred. He passed a row of motorcycles lined up outside the bar, glinting in the sun like trophies. The bikers were loud, joking, slapping backs. Walter didn't flinch. Noise never scared him. He'd heard worse. Much worse. As he walked by, he caught something in the corner of his eye movement, a chrome reflection. He turned slightly, and for a moment, the rearview mirror of one of the bikes caught his face. In that reflection, he didn't see the stooped old man everyone ignored. He saw a flicker. Just for a second. A young man in uniform, dirt on his cheeks, fear in his eyes, courage in his hands. He blinked. The image was gone. Back to the cracked skin, the sunken cheeks, the hair he no longer had. He adjusted his collar and kept walking. He didn't see the biker watching him. Didn't know the edge of his coat would catch the chrome handlebar. Didn't mean to brush it. Didn't even feel it. Because Walter Briggs wasn't thinking about today. He was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere long gone. It was nothing. A brush of fabric. A gentle sweep as Walter passed too close to the chrome line of parked motorcycles. His coat thick with age and threadbare patches caught a single handlebar barely. The bike didn't fall, didn't even wobble, just gave the faintest twitch like a sleeping dog adjusting in its dream. Walter stopped immediately. He turned back, both hands slightly raised. No fear, just courtesy. "Didn't mean to touch it, son," he said softly. "My jacket's thicker than I thought." He offered a faint, apologetic smile. It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't condescending. Just a simple, honest attempt to acknowledge a moment most people would have ignored. But the tallest biker in the group turned. He was young, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, mirrored sunglasses, shaved head, the kind of man who liked being seen. He stepped forward slowly. Each boot heel thudded on the sidewalk like a judge walking toward a verdict. The others quieted. Even the laughter died. The biker didn't say a word. He looked Walter up and down, took in the old jacket, the slouched frame, the gray stubble. Then, with a sudden motion so fast it didn't feel real, he slapped him. A full, open-handed, echoing crack that made birds take off from the rooftop across the street. Walter didn't scream. He just crumpled, like a house folding in on itself. One knee gave out. The cane dropped with a clatter. The paper bag tore as it hit the pavement. Bread rolled out onto the gutter. The postcard fluttered like a wounded bird. Blood dotted the corner of Walter's mouth. He reached up with the sleeve of his jacket and wiped it gently. Then reached for the bread, piece by piece. Not a single person moved. Inside the bar, a man glanced out the window, then turned back to his drink. At the cafe across the street, a woman lowered her phone, only to aim it toward the sidewalk. No one stepped forward. No one offered a hand. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just happen. It's built, stacked layer by layer from apathy, from not my problem, from someone else will help. Walter sat up slowly, used the base of a light pole for leverage. He reached for his cane, now resting just out of reach. He groaned not from pain, but from the weight of being watched and ignored. Somewhere a child asked too loudly, "Why did that man hit the grandpa?" No one answered. Walter didn't look at the crowd, didn't beg for their pity. He dusted off the loaf of bread like it still mattered, straightened his jacket like it still fit, and for a second in the mirrored visor of the biker's sunglasses, he saw his own face. Not the old one, the young one, the one who once stood beside broken engines and bleeding men, the one who didn't flinch when rockets screamed overhead, the one who kept others alive even when he almost didn't make it back himself. And now, here he was, bleeding in front of people who called themselves tough, alone in a crowd. The biker was still laughing, not loud, not belly deep, but that short mocking chuckle people use when they know they got away with something. He turned to his friends, arms wide like he was on stage. "Guy just walked right into my ride," he said. "Can't blame me if he folds like paper." And then, crack. Not a gunshot. Not another slap. A kick. A single sharp, precise kick landed squarely against the side of the biker's knee. The man went flying. Not far. Just far enough to send him sprawling across the sidewalk, his body thudding into a trash can with a hollow clang. His sunglasses flew off, mid-air, bounced twice on the curb, and spun like a coin across the concrete. One lens cracked on impact. The sound they made, that sharp, clattering crack of breaking bravado, was the first real noise anyone had heard in minutes. Gasps rose from the cafe. Chairs scraped. Someone dropped a fork. And then the street went still again. All eyes turned to the man now standing in front of Walter. He wasn't big, not tall, not loud, no badge, no uniform, just a dark blue hoodie jeans and a look in his eyes like he'd seen enough. He didn't raise his fists, didn't puff his chest. He just stood there. The biker, now back on one knee, roared in fury. "You think that was funny, huh? You want to go? He surged to his feet, fists clenched. But the man in the hoodie didn't move, didn't even flinch. He looked at him with steady eyes and said, voice calm as a drawn line, I could put you in the hospital for days. But you have no idea who you just laid hands on. The biker froze. Something in the way the man said it. Not angry, not proud, just certain. Like it wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The tension crackled in the air. People held their breath. Then slowly, Walter raised his hand. Just a little. Just enough. A small, almost imperceptible motion, a shake of the head. No words, no gesture for help. Just, don't fight for me. Don't make this louder than it already is. And the man in the hoodie nodded. He took one step back, hands still open, still loose, but ready if needed. He looked at Walter like checking if the old man was really okay. Not physically, but deeper. Walter didn't speak, didn't thank him, didn't need to. Because sometimes between men who've seen things respect doesn't come in words. It comes in knowing when to stop. The biker didn't stay down long. He staggered to his feet, legs stiff pride burning louder than pain. His sunglasses were gone, but the scowl remained. What the hell is wrong with you people? All this over some old guy who can't watch where he's going. He jabbed a finger toward Walter, still seated on the bench, reassembling his torn bag. Maybe if he's too old to walk straight, he should stay home. The words hit harder than the slap. Not for Walter, but for the people listening. Inside the cafe, forks froze mid-air. At the outdoor tables, coffee cooled, untouched. One woman near the window pressed her hand against the glass as if trying to push the words away. No one responded. Except, from somewhere behind the safety of the cafe door, a voice called out. Shaky, feminine, older. That man, she said, once rebuilt a field ambulance in the middle of a mortar strike. My husband was inside that ambulance. Her voice cracked. And he made it home. Because of him. Everyone turned. They didn't see the speaker, just a silhouette behind the glass. She didn't open the door, didn't come outside. But her voice had already stepped forward. And in that moment, the biker didn't look threatening anymore. He looked small. Lady, I don't know what story you heard, he muttered. But I didn't do anything serious. A pause, then another voice, this one much smaller. From a child. Why did he hit the grandpa? A boy asked, tugging on his mother's sleeve. Did the old man steal something? The mother didn't answer. She looked down at her son, then up at the man on the bench. Her expression shifted. Across the street, someone pulled out a phone not to text, not to scroll, but to record. They were already live streaming. The numbers climbing. Comments flooding in. What town is this? Who's the old man? Why is nobody doing anything? Another biker standing near the door of the bar stepped back into the shadows. Suddenly it didn't feel like a joke anymore. Walter still hadn't spoken. He simply sat, holding his bag like it still had purpose, one hand on his cane, the other wiping a smear of blood from his lip with the corner of his jacket. He didn't look angry, didn't look broken. He just looked tired. But in the reflection of a cafe window behind him, his posture sat straighter than it had a moment ago, as if the weight he carried was no longer just his to bear. One by one, the crowd began to shift. A waitress stepped outside, eyes wide with guilt. She looked at Walter, then at the biker, and took a slow step toward the sidewalk, only to stop herself. But she didn't go back inside. She stayed. A teenage boy, hoodie half-zipped, slid his phone into his pocket and stood still. Not filming, not posing, just standing. like he realized something important had just happened, and he didn't want to miss what came next. The man in the hoodie, the one who'd thrown the kick, was still nearby. He didn't move, didn't gloat. He simply stood behind Walter like a wall with no sign. No one said it out loud, but the air had shifted. What began as one man's humiliation had become something heavier, something shared. And for the first time since the slap, the biker seemed to notice. He looked around, really looked, at the phones, at the eyes, at the people who were no longer laughing. And then he took a single step back. Not far, just enough to realize he was standing alone. The biker's jaw clenched. His eyes darted around, scanning the faces, the phones, the silence that was no longer in his favor. He tried to laugh, but it didn't come out right. It cracked halfway through and died in his throat. He took another step back and raised his voice. All right. Everyone calm down. I just lost my temper, okay? It's not like I killed anybody." His voice bounced off the brick walls of the cafe, louder than it needed to be. Desperate, shrill. "You all act like I shot the guy. It was a slap. He bumped my ride. That's it." No one responded. Not the woman inside the cafe, not the child clutching his mother, not even the man in the hoodie who'd sent him flying minutes ago. And that silence hit harder than any word ever could. He shifted awkwardly, tried to laugh again. "You people are insane." That's when a sound broke the air. Not a shout, not an engine, just a quiet metallic clink, followed by the soft clang of something small hitting pavement. All eyes turned. It came from the far end of the sidewalk. An older man, maybe late 60s, stepped forward from the shadows near the hardware store. He wore a baseball cap, jeans, and a windbreaker with a faded Air Force patch on the sleeve. He didn't say a word, didn't look angry, just tired. In his hand moments ago had been a medal, a round silver commendation with a ribbon frayed at the edges. Now it lay on the ground between him and the biker. "You didn't just slap a man," he said, voice low but firm. "You struck every one of us who was ever forgotten." The biker looked down at the medal. It lay there, still cold, deliberate. Not dramatic, just present. And suddenly, the man who moments ago towered over the sidewalk now looked like a child who had misread the room and realized too late. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. A woman stepped forward from the diner. She didn't speak either. She just walked over to Walter, crouched, and picked up his fallen cane. Her hands trembled. She offered it to him with both hands, like returning something sacred. Walter took it, nodded. Behind them, someone else knelt and retrieved the crushed postcard from the gutter. They smoothed it gently and placed it back into Walter's torn paper bag, still half full of bread. The biker watched it all. His fists opened, his shoulders slumped. He looked at his own hands like he no longer recognized them. "I didn't know who he was," he said quietly. The old man with the Air Force patch stepped closer. "That's the problem," he replied. "You didn't care." The words landed like a weight, not just on the biker, but on the entire street. Nobody yelled, nobody cursed. They didn't have to. The silence was heavier than judgment, and the biker felt every ounce of it. He turned slightly, looked toward the exit of the block, where his motorcycle still sat gleaming untouched. But something in him couldn't walk toward it. He looked once more at Walter, who didn't look back. Not out of spite, but because he didn't need to. Walter had already chosen forgiveness the moment he stayed seated. The biker swallowed hard. For the first time that day, he didn't feel watched. He felt seen. And that was worse. A week had passed. The street where it all happened had mostly returned to normal, but not quite. The bench had been cleaned. The blood was gone. But the memory lingered in the way people paused just a little longer before walking past it. At the local Veterans Center, flyers had gone out. Monthly transportation was needed for elderly vets attending a community gathering, part ceremony, part free clinic, part excuse to get them out of the house. The call for volunteers had been quietly posted. No one expected much of a response. But that morning, before the doors even opened, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. An old Ford, paint chipped at the edges, back seats cleared out. The driver stepped out. It was him, the biker. No leather vest, no sunglasses, just jeans, a plain t-shirt, and hands that looked like they weren't sure what to do when not clenched into fists. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for attention. He walked up to the registration table and said quietly, "If any of them need a ride, I've got room for 4. The volunteer coordinator blinked, checked the clipboard. You here to volunteer?" The biker nodded. Just once. That was it. He didn't stay for the speeches, didn't mingle. He just pulled up to the curb whenever a name was called, helped them into the truck and drove. No playlist, no talking. Just a man behind the wheel and veterans who noticed, but said nothing. Not at first. But they knew. They always know. Word spread not through posts or press, but through glances, nods, and a kind of quiet acknowledgement that lives among men who've seen worse and survived better. He came back the next week. And the week after. He was never late. Never loud. And eventually he stopped being that guy from the video. He became just the guy with the truck. One morning, as he helped a frail veteran into the front seat, the coordinator asked him, "You got a name we should use for the schedule?" He paused. "Kyle," he said. "No last name. No rank. Just Kyle." That was enough. Later that month, Walter signed up for one of the trips. No one said anything special when his name was called. Just a gentle murmur in the crowd. As the truck pulled up, Kyle stepped out, walked around to the passenger side, and then paused. He looked down at his own hand, the same hand that had once struck a man trying to pick up his bread. Now trembling slightly as it reached for the door handle. No words, just breath, just wait. He opened the door, carefully bracing it so the vet wouldn't have to lift a thing. Walter moved slowly. The same jacket, the same boots. He didn't hesitate. He sat down in the back seat, cane between his knees. Kyle closed the door without a word, and as he circled around to the driver's seat, he caught Walter's eyes in the rearview mirror. Just a glance. Just a second. And in that narrow rectangle of reflection, something passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not an apology. Recognition. Walter gave the smallest of nods. Kyle didn't nod back. He just drove. The truck rolled forward. And with it, so did something else. Not a redemption arc. Not a viral comeback. Just a man doing something right. Because he had once done something wrong. He never mentioned the slap. Never posted a caption. Never tried to rewrite the story. He simply showed up. Again. And again. And again. And over time, the weight of those small, steady miles began to shift something much heavier, both in him and in the people who once looked away. Months passed. The story faded from headlines as stories do. The video slowed in its climb. The views stopped counting. The internet moved on. But the town didn't. They remembered. Not in hashtags, not in speeches, but in the way people stood a little taller when an old man passed by, in how cars slowed at the corner of Main and Ellison. That's where it had happened. That's where it changed. And so one morning, without ceremony, without announcement, a plaque appeared beside the bench. Bronze. Simple. Bolted into the concrete with care. It read, "At this spot a man fell. so an entire town could remember how to stand. No flowers, no ribbon cutting, just the plaque, and the weight of what it meant. A week later, early in the morning before the shops opened, a man stepped out of an old pickup truck. He was alone. No crowd, no camera crew. Just him and a rag in his back pocket. He crouched beside the plaque, pulled out the rag, wiped the dust that had gathered from the weekend wind. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to make sure the words stayed visible. He stood up, took one long look at the bench, then got back in the truck and drove away. Nobody waved, nobody cheered, but a motion-activated security cam above the coffee shop caught it all. No sound, just a quiet man, brushing dust off someone else's honor. Later that month, someone zoomed in on the image of Walter used in a local article. They posted a side-by-side comparison on social media. Left photo A, grainy black and white shot from 1973. A soldier carrying a child across a crumbling bridge, rain pelting down chaos behind him. Right photo, Walter Briggs, 84. Same eyes, same mouth. Caption, same man, same strength, same silence. It went viral in hours. But Walter didn't comment, didn't acknowledge it. He still walked the same route, still mailed the same postcard, still nodded at the same barista who now always greeted him with a small salute. As for Kyle, he was still driving, still showing up, still loading walkers into the truck bed with a quiet grunt and a steady hand. Some days, they didn't even see each other. But when they did, when Walter stepped into that same pickup again and their eyes met in the mirror, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the deepest redemption isn't loud. It's consistent. And sometimes the loudest act of honor is silence. Sometimes a kick isn't meant to knock someone down, but to wake an entire street up. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is quietly brush the dust off someone who once stood, so the rest of us wouldn't have to fall. Have you ever seen a stranger brave enough to stand up like that? Comment Walter, if you still believe quiet goodness lives among us. And share this with someone who needs a reason to look twice.